Hello, my name is Karen Bonaker, Corel Painter Master and instructor for Digital Art Academy. It is my honor to demonstrate the brushes in this new brush category for painter called Inky Washes. Inky Wash brush category contains brush variants that are reminiscent of ink washes and expressive line work, perfect for illustrations, sumi-e, and pen and ink drawings. The bonsai tree painting is a lovely example of the detail and texture that can be achieved with these brushes. I have pulled the 15 brushes included in this set to the custom palette, so let's begin with our first brush, the Big Wet Toner. This brush is a watercolor brush, and when you first begin painting with it, it will add a new watercolor layer. It's a good idea to have the water panel open so you can control some of the effects of this brush, such as the diffuse amount and the wetness amount. I'm going to choose a soft pink value here and slowly paint in a few brush strokes to give you an example of how this brush can be useful in creating nice washes for skies and backgrounds. It's also sensitive to paper texture, so you can always open your paper texture panel and choose a paper texture that might have some interesting texture in it. And maybe I'll choose this one, and then pull in a few washes on top of that to add some additional texture. And you can see that the texture begins to reveal itself as the disbursement takes place in the brush. The next brush we're going to look at is called the Zen Leaf Glazing Brush, and I'm going to open up my little sketch here so I can start to begin to use this brush in conjunction with the sketch to show you some of the ways that you can work with it. This brush is a glazing brush, so it's a really nice brush to be able to use at different glazing opacities and of course in different composite or merge modes. As I begin to paint with this brush, it will add a new layer above the watercolor layer, so that gives you the ability to work on a new layer to develop the painting. This one is a very expressive line work type of brush, perfect for illustrations or just expressive brush work. I would use it here to define the sketch marks maybe a little bit further, and this is also a brush that I can enable paper texture. So let me go ahead and open up the dab options, and you'll notice that the brush I can apply the dab stencil using either paper, flow map, or texture. And for this one I'll go ahead and choose paper, and I'll come back down to my paper panel, which I can either open from the property bar or open it up and have it available here. We'll go to one of the default paper textures in the watercolor papers called Window Frost. And when I use this brush, you can see how it imparts that beautiful texture. By bringing the glazing down, I can also control the amount of opacity of that brush. It's also a beautiful brush just for making bamboo leaves. But for here, I think I'll just continue to maybe pull in a little bit more texture into the trunk of the tree. And I'll bring the glazing up a little bit on that to about 60%. And I'll just define these branches and the texture within the trunk of the bonsai. The next brush is called the Noton pen, and again it's a beautiful brush for simply sketching with. And you can see that it's also very expressive, beautiful for illustration work, line work. And again, this brush has the ability to use dab options and the ability for you to use merge modes, glazing, and work with either paper, flow maps, or texture. And you can choose your paper texture directly from the property bar as well. Beautiful, expressive brush. Very soft pressure. You'll get a very fine line, perfect for detail, and firmer pressure. You'll get a heavier stroke. So another beautiful brush to work with. The next brush is called the Zen Leaf Wet Brush. This brush again has the ability for you to work with paper, flow map, or texture. And for this one we'll go ahead and select texture once again. And I think I'll work again with the window frost brush. And this brush I can use on the watercolor layer because this is a watercolor brush. And again, you can see that it flows out. You'll want to have the water panel open so you can again work with the wetness of the brush, the diffuse amount, and also set the wind force and wind angle on this brush. But you can see based upon some of the paper textures that I'm choosing here, you can get some really nice effects. I'm going to use this brush with the paper texture window frost here, and I'm going to go into the trunk of this tree a little bit further and define the edges, and also start to begin to develop a little more texture and edge softness, just to give it a little more of that inky watercolor flow and appearance. I've gone a little further here with the painting, and you can see now that I've worked to fill in some of the trunks and get some of the branches flowing out from the main bonsai tree. It's a good idea also to open up your general brush controls, which you can do directly from the property bar by selecting the general show or hide general panel. And I can go to the subcategory of this brush and choose wet remove density, and I can use that to pull out some areas that I think I would like to lighten a little bit. And this will actually erase the paint, and it also is nice for incorporating a little bit more of that feeling of texture within the trunk of the tree. The next brush we're going to look at is the Bonsai brush category, and this one we're going to use to develop the actual leaves and foliage of the tree. And we're going to start off by using a nice value of green and begin working this into the tree. Now this brush also, you can choose varying different paper textures to use here, and for this one I'm going to simply use the basic paper and start to work in and develop the canopy of the tree. And you can see that it's a very expressive brush. You can use it in varying sizes depending upon what you're looking to develop. And I'm kind of working in a back and forth and up and down motion with this brush. and you'll notice that this is a watercolor brush as well. You will definitely want to have your paper texture open in case you do want to change paper textures to add a little bit different texture to the brush. The next brush we're going to choose here is called the Mountain Noton brush. And this brush is a beautiful brush to use to create lovely texture within your painting. But I also want to show you another way of using this brush that I think you'll enjoy. I'm going to close the visibility on these layers here because I want to show you this. And we're going to go ahead and add a watercolor layer here. We're going to choose a nice dark color. This brush you'll definitely want to work with either paper, flow map, or texture, and in this case we're going to work with the paper texture. And I'm going to come down again to the window frost option, and I'm going to go ahead and use this brush, and let's see, and let it just create this nice texture. And we're going to use it to create the look of mountain peaks. We'll use something in the back here and just let it flow. Now what we'll want to do here with this brush is to make sure that the water panel is open, and we're going to bring our wind force and all the way over to 100%, and our diffuse amount up, and our wetness amount all the way up. And I want to show you what happens when I start going over these brush marks. And you'll notice that the brush and the wetness of that brush begins to flow down. And this is a beautiful effect that you can use in your mountain paintings when you're creating. And you can just continue it and just experiment with it and have fun. It's a really gorgeous way of adding additional texture and just beautiful brushwork to your ink paintings. This is a good example here of how it's flowing down. Here I would probably use also the Bonsai brush. I would go back to the Bonsai and use that brush to maybe show the appearance of little bonsai trees on the mountainside. And I would also at that point use one of the highly detailed brushes such as the Noton pen or the Zen leaf glazing to bring out the little trunks of the trees. Let's go with the Zen leaf glazing here with the winter frost paper texture. We'll bring glazing up and use a nice dark color here, and at that point I can use it to create some nice texture. And I think I'll use the standard paper here just to give myself, we'll zoom in a little bit here. Just to emphasize maybe the trunks of some trees here. So this is one that you'll definitely want to use the Mountain Noton to create beautiful mountains with texture. Remember to apply paper or flow maps or even texture, and you're going to get some beautiful, beautiful effects with this brush. So we'll go ahead and take that out. The next brush is called Paper Washes, and again, this is a great brush for applying dab stencils, so remember that you can use paper, flow maps, or texture with this brush. This is a watercolor brush, and we'll add a watercolor layer. It's beautiful for creating additional texture in the background or anywhere where you think you'd like to apply texture. And I'm going to change my color a little bit here and maybe use that to go into the pot of the plant. And you can see that I'm using a different paper texture, and that how beautiful that applies that texture into that area. And of course we could always change and go to other textures as well. Change our color. And you can see that how nice that looks and just in the respect of creating great texture with a watercolor brush. The next brush we'll use is called Water's Edge here. This is another brush that will add a nice feeling of texture. Washes, if you want to improve, if you're looking to create an area where you want to maybe add a little bit of shadow below, this would be a good one to use. Let's actually use that brush here to create a little cast shadow below the pot. Again, this brush you can use apply the dab stencil either with paper, flow maps, or texture. And it's also a beautiful brush just to create that look of water, or anywhere where you want to add texture. Just a fun brush to use. The next brush we'll look at is called Reeds, and this brush I would use probably towards the end of the painting when I'm looking to bring in the look of maybe some little grasses at the base of the bonsai tree. So before we go to reeds, let's go ahead and fill in this area in the bottom here. And for that we're going to use a brush called Zen Blender. And I'm going to pick a nice color here and go right into the bottom here and use that brush just to create some nice look of fine gravel at the bottom. And you can see that this brush kind of flows out and creates this blending effect, but while it's doing that as well, it's creating a great look of texture, which is a lot of fun. I use this brush also, and I may apply a little bit of it actually in the trunk of the tree here now, just to create some look of highlights and additional texture. The trouble that you get into with watercolors sometimes is that things can start looking a little bit flat. So this is a good brush to use in terms of bringing out highlights and creating a little more volume in the actual foliage of the tree. So now that we have our little textures in there, let's go back to our reed brush and use that brush now to paint in some little reeds at the bottom and grasses at the bottom of our bonsai. The brush stroke is very subtle. It can be used, let me go a little darker on that so you can see. It can be used at a very small brush stroke to create a very delicate look of grasses, or you can use it at a larger brush size, which creates a little more textural effect, and you may find a use for that for wheat fields, grassy fields, and even adding texture to trees and foliage areas. To continue to gain a little more volume in the actual tree foliage area, We're going to work with the next brush called the Splatter Sumi, and this one is a very free brush. You can use it really just to create texture, and I'm using it to create texture in the tree. And you can see that it's more of a watercolor splatter brush, and I love using it just simply for creating additional texture in my paintings. The wet line bristle is a brush that you'll want to use in conjunction with your black line work. And by that I mean if I go to layer 7 here, which I did some of the work on the tree trunk, this is the one where you will want to select the color that you're using here and use it just at the edge to accentuate or soften edges. And it's really very, very nice. It does a nice effect. You'll notice that you can also control the wetness on the water panel here, the wind angle and wind force. I use it quite often just to add nice soft edges where you know, I may want the paint to look as if it's flowing down a little bit further, or anywhere where you just want to add additional serendipity to your paintings. Zen Sketch is a beautiful sketchy watercolor brush, and again you can control a lot of the brush effects on the water panel, and it's just a very soft and lovely brush to use in terms of very creative, expressive line work, almost a calligraphic effect that you can get with the brush as well. So this is one that you'll enjoy working with. Zen Flat Color is a brush, again, one that you'll want to use for line work, detail work. It also has a glazing panel, and again you can work with all the different options such as paper and flow map and textures. I'm going to use this brush now to bring out some highlights in the wood, and I'm going to work with a white value here, and you can see that as I do this it's bringing out highlights within the bark of the bonsai tree, and I can be very specific about where I apply it. Anywhere I want to add highlights. And I can also use it to expand the detail of the little branches and limbs of the bonsai. And the last brush is a Zen Wash brush. It is a gorgeous brush for just creating nice washy areas on your painting. Again, it is a watercolor brush. You can take advantage of the water panel in terms of diffusing amount, wetness, and wind force. Again, very, very soft washes, and the way that it just sprays out the paint is one of my favorite things about the brush. So another good brush in conjunction with big wet toner for creating nice fluid backgrounds in your paintings. Okay, so I hope you enjoy this. These are a wonderful brush set, very expressive and fluid to work with, and I hope you'll enjoy them as much as I've enjoyed showing them to you. Take care.